Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I represent Virginia, the Eastern Shore, Virginia Beach, and a lot of the Chesapeake Bay region. So Virginians know how to be good stewards of the environment without sacrificing jobs or hurting our economy. Not only is the Chesapeake Bay watershed home to roughly 3,600 species of plants and animals, but also provides countless economic and recreational opportunities, generating $33 billion each year. So Mr. Melito and Mr. Sandberg, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management recently announced the draft environmental impact statement for an offshore wind project off the coast of Virginia Beach, creating the potential for new job opportunities and economic growth for Virginians. The wind industry is growing along the Atlantic coast and provides opportunities to diversify our energy production. But Virginia's fishing community and tourism economy are also crucial to our economic well-being, and critical military training exercises take place off our coastline. How is the wind industry engaging with and accommodating concerns of these stakeholders to ensure balanced access to the outer continental shelf?
Yeah, considering the balancing needs of all the different offshore industries and stakeholders is very important to our industry. I do like to point to the Gulf of Mexico experience because we've been developing energy resources there for decades in a compatible way with military tourism, commercial recreational fishing. So we have the experience, we've been able to do that very well. And we've seen that also in the development of the wind industry throughout Europe. So the process that we've seen as it has moved forward is a collaborative process. It's through NEPA and it's through the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, where all the different stakeholders are able to weigh in and provide their thoughts in a deliberative way to make sure that we're allowing all users to be able to move forward with their activities with as little interruption as possible. And one thing I like to point to is the industry working together to find a way to separate the wind turbines to the greatest extent possible so that there's enough space for all users, but we're also able to build up a wind farm that will provide the wind capacity to power the grid at shoreside. So there's a lot that goes into it. The companies that are moving forward with developing these projects work closely with the communities, with the state leaders, with the federal family to make sure that we're doing everything we can to address all the competing needs.
And how is the regulatory process under NEPA impacting timelines for offshore wind leasing and construction, and what can this committee do to better the certainty in the NEPA process?
I think a lot of this is going to come down to making sure we do have guide rails on the NEPA analysis to make sure that we don't have a process that is never ending and that can ultimately always lead to a challenge in court and, depending on the judge, strike down a project or delay it and send it back. I will say that there are already multiple lawsuits filed against the early mover wind projects in the Atlantic, multiple lawsuits. So there's a lot of concern about that because those lawsuits could have an impact on the ones that are in line behind them, depending upon how they shake out. So we need to make sure that the agencies have a framework with some guide rails, and we need to also look at the remedies available to the court to make sure that we're not stifling investment and putting companies in a position to want to invest elsewhere in the world rather than here.
Right. Thank you. And Ms. Sugama, while I recognize the importance of the offshore wind industry to my district and other coastal communities, it does nothing to financially support federal conservation efforts, so unlike the oil and gas industry. As you know, the Great American Outdoors Act directs roughly $1.9 billion in energy development royalties to conservation efforts across the country, including national parks and wildlife refuges, as well as permanently funding the Land and Water Conservation Fund at $900 million annually. In fact, 94% of federal conservation efforts are funded exclusively by royalties from oil and gas industry leases and production. So with the Biden administration slowing the permitting process, limiting production leases, and overregulating the oil and gas industry, what are the expected impacts on conservation efforts over the next decade, and how can we ensure that funding remains available for the conservation of our coastal communities?
I really appreciate that, because I think that's something that does get lost, is if we took oil and natural gas development to zero on federal lands, that would take away that $2.8 billion, federal lands and waters, that goes into conservation with no replacement for it, because right now wind provides something, I think it provided something like $5 million, whereas we provide billions of dollars. So there's no, if you took away oil and gas, that conservation funding dries up.
So there would be none, pretty much, for our coastal communities for conservation efforts.
I mean, if these policies were ultimately taken to their conclusion, which I don't really see happening, but yes, if you didn't continue to produce more on federal lands and waters, eventually that money would go to zero.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I yield back.